Hello, my name is Gary Schindel. I'm assisting David Hughes in our Luminary talks today. I would request that we have folks turn off their cell phones, that we be cognizant of not walking down the middle hall, and we'll take questions after the beginning of, at the end of the talk. So thank you very much, and I'm going to turn it over to Dave Hughes. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our speaker today is Premier Cave Diver Forrest Wilson. Forrest has been at the forefront of American cave diving literally for decades. For example, many years ago, using equipment that seems very sophomoric by today's standards, and a headlight originally designed for coal mining, he cracked the Bowen Sump in Oregon Cave and became the first man in America to discover more than a mile of virgin passage beyond a sump. Forrest maintains this high level of exploration even to the present day. In fact, even past age 70, Forrest remains the lead diver on the longest cave and the second longest underwater cave in cavern-rich state of Alabama. In possession of a keen mind and with a special aptitude for tools, Forrest has invented a number of innovations germane to cave diving. For example, he made one of the very early rebreathers specifically adapted to the cave environment. He created what is known as the Wilson reel, a huge improvement over previous diving reels and much easier to manufacture. And he created a directional device for the cave line itself that has saved, no doubt, countless lives, and in fact bears the name Wilson Cord Arrow in his honor. Please welcome American cave diver, legend, and great friend of speleology, Forrest Wilson.
I'm not sure who the heck Dave was talking about there. I'll try to do something.
Title slide says, "Where no man has gone before." We came up in this sump and there's a beer can because we're polluting this planet from top to bottom. My father went to medical school in 1949. I was a kindergartner. Started off in kindergarten in Louisiana. And my mother had 5 kids when we moved there. She had 7 by the time we left. And she didn't have time to keep track of all of us. So she only had one rule for me, and that was to be home by supper time. I had a friend that was a cave diver, and he was concerned that he was doing crazy things like cave diving, so he went to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist said, "Did you have any limits when you were a child?" And he said, "What do you mean by that?" And he says, "Well, did your mother say that not to leave the block or not to leave the yard or anything like that?" And he says, "No." He says, "Well, then you are looking for your limits." He said, that's the problem. Anyway, my father used to haul us off to university lectures, and for the most part they were pretty boring for an 8-year-old, but the one that I really liked, the guy had pictures of fish, and later came back with silent movies of fish. My father took us up to him afterwards. He got down on one knee and shook our hands, my brother and I, and I didn't know who that man was for 20 years. Anyway, I learned a lot from him. I read all of his books, and the one thing that really, really saved my butt was he said that if you go into a cave, you need to have a line. Well, I didn't go in a cave for a long time, but I remembered that. Hello. There we go. All right. My father liked to travel, and we traveled all over the country. By the time I was in high school, I had been in every state in the lower U.S. I have yet to be in Alaska or Hawaii, but he liked caves. We went in a lot of commercial caves. This is Luray. I can't even remember the names of all of them, but almost every trip we went on, we ended up in one. We used to go visit relatives, and we were visiting my mother's brothers and sisters, and one of my cousins, just a little older than I was, had a set of scuba gear. And I was just so impressed by that. And I was just asking him all kind of questions. And he says, well, I'm going diving this afternoon. Just come with me. So he went to dive for a little while and came up and let me put the tank on and swim around in the shallow part of the lake. I didn't go very deep because it was Washington State, and that was cold water.
Forrest, can I change your mic now?
Change it?
Yeah, this one's not projecting very well. So hold
Let me grab my light bulb.
Hey, Jay. Hello? Hello? Is that a little better? Okay.
And this is
Okay, good. You're very soft, and so you need to make sure you project well.
all right. I will try to talk louder.
And let's do the audio check again with Alex.
Alex, you all right back there with the audio? All right.
Thank you very much.
Anyway, not long after that, we moved to Colorado. My father finished medical school and decided to go to specialist training in radiology. So we ended up in Colorado. And I explored a lot of places there. We had rock shelters on our property. I crawled through, chasing the raccoons out of the way. And there were mines in the area. And one of them was uranium mine. And I figure being exposed to all that uranium is why I'm a luminary today. I glow in the dark. All right, anyway, after we, this is something I just added this morning, almost forgot about. One of the trips that we went on while we were still in Colorado was to Mesa Verde. It's down in the Four Corners, Arizona, New Mexico. Anyway, I was impressed by Mesa Verde. First of all, my father, being a radiologist, was interested in the x-rays they had of the mummies. And there was a sign there that pointed out that there were calcium needles, almost a centimeter long, on all of their joints, which means that these people couldn't have moved in years. The way these pueblos are built, you don't see it, but they're up on a cliff, and you have to climb up the cliff face to get to them. This was to keep the Plains Indians out. After a point, they couldn't climb up there anymore, so they just sat in one place until they died. But it occurred to me that if you become inactive, you're going to end up like that. So I made it a resolution at 14 years old, never to stop moving. That's why I'm still pushing caves at 71. I pushed one yesterday, by the way. Okay, after we were living in Baton Rouge when he finished his residency, and I went to high school there, but then I went off to Loyola to go to college. Majored in physics, minored in math and computer science. But I used to visit back and forth to Baton Rouge. And I was up there one time, and one of my high school buddies had a little part-time job, and he says, come with me. He says, we can talk while I work because I'm being paid by the job, not the hour. It was in a planetarium. And the director of the planetarium talked to me, found out where I was, and says, well, if you know anybody looking for a job, let me know. So I said, sure. Went back to school and thought about it and wrote him, and I said, I'm going to be out of school in a few months. Can you wait? So I ended up at the Baton Rouge Planetarium for several years. Once I had money, I went out and bought my own scuba gear. Then eventually I moved to Atlanta. Went to work at a planetarium in this place called Fernbank Science Center. Then discovered one of my high school buddies, a different one, had moved up there, and he had discovered a cave. And he says, you want to go caving? I said, sure. I got one extra slide I forgot about. I put my computer science skills to work and automated that planetarium. Whoops, too fast. Okay, this is Case Cave. This is the first cave I was ever in. You wouldn't know it now if you were there because they shoved a culvert. Crazy light. Yeah, well, you see the idea. They shoved a culvert in there and put a gate on it, but you can still go in. It's a sort of a vertical cave. There was a tree in it the first time I was there with these wood 2x4s nailed across it so you could get up and down. But on one of my subsequent trips in there, we found this hole in the floor. Well, it was actually a funnel-like, and you went down, there was a hole at the bottom, and I looked down, it's about 15 feet to another level. I couldn't climb back out. It was sloped, and it was like a ant trap, the spider trap. And they threw me a rope, but I didn't have anything to connect the rope to. So I clipped a carabiner on my pistol belt for my canteen. You know how much weight a pistol belt will hold? Mine for a few seconds. Anyway, I survived, but ever since then, when I go caving, I wear a piece of webbing around my waist with a carabiner locking it like a belt buckle, so that if I ever get anything like that again, I get a rappel on my belt. Now, I don't know who that dork is with that soft hat, but I'm sure some of you older people probably recognize that young lady next to him. No, I'm not going to tell you who she is. If you figure it out, that's fine. All right, I'm living in Atlanta, figuring I need to go diving, so I go to a dive shop. So the head of that dive shop, the guy here, was YMCA instructor number 1. And he firmly believed that you couldn't buy air if you weren't certified by the YMCA, and that was the only organization at the time. So I went out and learned to dive all over again. I'd been diving for years at that point. But anyway, while I was in that class, I was building a camera housing, so I came to the instructor and I said, when we go on our open water checkout, can I test my camera housing before I put my expensive camera in it? And he said, sure. Well, then he said, you have to wait to be the last one. Okay, I waited, and I did my little checkout, which took all of 5 minutes. Today, there's minimum time for a checkout dive, and 5 minutes doesn't cut it. But anyway, he wasn't even in the water at the time. His assistant instructor was teaching me. And I said, the instructor told me I could check my camera housing. He says, I don't know anything about that. You got to go ask him. I go up, he's laying on the beach, he's tired, he's cold. He says, no, go down there. And while he's pulling up the rope that we were doing our training on, you go down with him. Well, by the time I got down there, he'd pulled it up. And he looks around like this and whispers, he says, don't you tell anybody I did this. But you go down there and you check your camera housing and you get your butt back up here. I had a flashlight in that camera housing. You want to guess what I saw? A cave. I went straight in that cave. The only reason I'm alive today is I thought if they caught me in there, they wouldn't give me my card. But when I turned around, the silt cloud was closing in on the entrance. The only difference between me and the 20 people that died in that same cave was that I had enough sense to know that I made that mess. That was the way out. Okay, I had a few other hobbies. I built that hang glider from plans. You can't do that today. In fact, you couldn't even do it a month after I bought them. I got some stainless steel from government surplus, and they used it for the wing spars and stuff. It was pretty heavy, hard to fly. I also rode motorcycles, which is why I happened to be testing it there, because those are the tracks where we practice motorcycles. I raced motocross for a while. All right. While I was in Atlanta, we had an International Planetarium Society meeting, and I met the guy that was in charge of the planetarium at the Smithsonian. So he hired me away from Atlanta, and I went up to the Smithsonian. Well, I had tried to get into the NSS years earlier, and you had to be sponsored by another NSS member, and I didn't know one. Right before I moved up to D.C., I finally met somebody and had just joined the NSS at that time. And I met Paul Stevens at the Grotto meeting. And I told Paul that I was from Georgia, and he immediately thought I meant Alabama. So he made me the vertical training person. Actually, I skipped that part. I had met Ed Strasser while I was in Atlanta. He was still at Georgia Tech, and he loaned me a copy of the book Prusiking. And I was reading it, and I discovered that the Blue Water Factory was 20 miles away in Georgia. So I went and bought some blue water rope and some rack and climbing gear. So I had taught myself to do vertical, but I was far from an expert. But they didn't know anything up there, so it worked out. Anyway, his pet project at the time was Oregon Cave. So I skipped another one that I forgot about. I helped them automate their planetarium too. This is the saltpeter vats in Oregon Cave. I'm sure at least one person in this audience knows about that. Yeah, really. Anyway, he found out I was a diver. I guess I told him. And he said, well, we've got this sump, we need somebody to dive. You know, I was pretty much a brand new scuba diver. I actually had become an instructor before I moved up there, but I still didn't know what I was doing. We went on a recon dive. On the way to that sump, there's a 135-foot drop. And I thought, well, we can get the gear down there. It shouldn't be a problem. That's Paul. It's on the way down to the sump. And that's the sump. That's Steve Stokowski. I'm going to have to get over here a little bit where I can point. Well, I can't see them, but there's a feature right there to watch, and there's one there. And notice how far the water is down from there. And you just barely see it flowing right through here. By the time we decided and convinced the Grotto to help carry gear down there, the water was up over a foot. This is that same little thing that I was pointing at here and over here. This is the way into the cave. Good thing we'd ascertained that when the water was clear. Steve was belaying me with this 3/8 inch rope. Wasn't climbing rope, but you didn't need that much strength. We didn't have enough line. It didn't get us all the way into airspace. So I came back again a month or two later with another diver that I knew in Atlanta, and he and I we were over this way a little bit. We'd borrowed a reel, but it was an old aluminum reel meant for ships to use or something. It got banged up on the way to the sump, and it jammed, and I got him all tangled, and I put my hand on his back, and I couldn't detect any breathing. I thought the man had died. So I came around him. I wasn't going to die with him. And here I've got half the Grotto standing there saying, you know, where's your buddy? So I just pulled him out by the line. And when he got into the head pool, he started to crawl, and he was almost out of the water with his face still in. But anyway, we survived that, and I wrote an article, a couple of them actually, for the DC Speleograph. It turns out that the most famous cave diver in America at the time read the DC Speleograph. And he wrote me a letter, and he pretty much invited himself up to West Virginia. And I was willing to have the help because I hadn't figured out a good way to get through. By the time he got up there, I had built more or less a proper reel. It was my first real attempt to build one. I had 1/8 inch parachute cord on it, and he managed to get 200 feet, is all the line I had. And he comes back out and he hands me this little safety spool that he carried with number 18 line, which is about like kite string. And he says, here, tie this onto the end of the line. He says, I'm sure it's about to come up in air. I'm sure that he'd already been up there, but he wasn't going to take the glory from me, which I thought was sweet. But anyhow, he found the only rock in that whole sump and tied that line on it. And then I tied that little bitty string off to the side and came up here. This is the only picture we have beyond that sump. But as Dave pointed out earlier, we found a mile beyond that sump. All right, let me turn my page here. All right. Then Paul had another project for me. Well, got a couple of slides in between. This is the Oregon Cave field house. And the truck on the far left is mine, the one on the far right is Sheck Exley's, and the guy on the porch is one of my cave diving students. Well, I think at the time he was open water student. And we checked a whole bunch of leads up in that general area. All right. Paul was working on a dig in Senate Thorn. And when they got where they thought maybe somebody could get through, he wanted a little skinny guy, so he invited me. And he also invited her. She's pretty skinny, too. So we were the first two in there. Steve Sikowski was with us. That's him down on the bottom. Long time ago. And, of course, he's a geologist, and he loved playing geologist, so he's showing us something. I don't remember now what. And then I went on a bunch of photo trips with Paul. He was an avid photographer, and I was sort of learning. But this guy's Chip Clark. He's a pretty famous cave photographer. He worked for the Smithsonian, so I was impressed, and we got to be sort of friends. I hated to hear that he died a couple of years ago. All right. Remember the book Prosecuting by Bob Thrun? Well, I met Thrun up there, and he showed me an NSS News that had an article about diving in Judy Springs. This is Judy Springs. We got over there and says, yeah, sure, we're going to go dive in that. The first trick was figuring out where the actual cave was. I mean, if you look back here, you figure it's probably over there somewhere where that opening is. It was about halfway between that tree and the opening. And the guys that wrote the article said the entrance was real small, so bring two tanks, one to dig out the entrance and the other one to make the dive. Well, I brought everything he suggested, but you can tell this was a while ago because I'm still diving with the miner's light, the electric one. Go back. And only have one tank. After we made several trips in there, at this point, we'd gone all the way through the sump, come up in air, gone to the end of the air, discovered that there was a near sump, near siphon that, you could nose breathe through. And then a climb out of that and more cave. And we decided to come back out and make another trip. And this is the last trip we did in there. That's why the guys got the boots there. And by that time, I'd already invented a fairly decent line reel and a much better light. It's got a car headlight in it and liquid NiCad batteries. The guy on the right there that you can just barely see is Barney. He's going to show up here sooner or later. This is inside, so it was a well-decorated thing. The reason the formations are going under the water is they built a dam out there. So it wasn't always a lake. And as you can see, that's one of my students, David. He's not the least bit excited about doing this. And neither was I. Okay, I made several trips to Florida, and one of the trips I made down there, I met this guy. This is a recent picture. He's actually younger than I am. He was from Australia, and he had pictures that he had taken in caves in Australia, and I was so impressed that I wanted to go to Australia. So I invited him to come up and do some virgin sumps with me, and he came. Met my wife's girlfriend and stayed for 6 months. Anyway, this is Bob Thrun. He had another cave he wanted me to push. Before I forget Judy Springs, we went 6,000 feet back there, and at that time was a world record under the water. And I called Sheck Exley and I said, we've broken the mile now. He says, where? I said, in West Virginia. He said, were there any air bells? And I said, yes. He says, how long is it if you subtract all the air bells? Well, it wasn't a mile. So he didn't give me the record, but he ended up having to give it to his worst competitor later. I think 20/20 hindsight, he'd rather given it to me. But anyway, Bob had another project, Bob Thrun. And as you can see, it's fairly snug in there. This is what's called the Broken Nothing entrance to a cave called My Cave. And he had mapped My Cave, and he had mapped Simmons Mingo, and he was convinced that if we went through the sump in there, that we'd connect. Well, we did, but it wasn't straight like he thought it was. It zigzagged all over the place. I mean, the first sump came up dry, and you could walk, and then there's another sump, and then another dry. But anyway, it took us several trips. But Barney was with us, and Barney couldn't get through that squeeze. You could see from the picture, he's a pretty big boy. Well, the next trip, Barney came in there, and he had lost 50 pounds, and he still couldn't get through, and we heard him chipping away with a hammer and a chisel. And he came in, and there was no way I was going to say, you can't dive. So he was with us the next couple of trips, and then on the trip where we finally made the connection, I figured, we're probably just going to have one more sump come up and dry again, and I let Barney go, and Barney now holds the record for connecting those two caves. All right, then Paul had another thing, and same in Oregon Cave, to do a scaling pole. Well, I had all that stainless steel left over, so that's the scaling pole. You can see it going down through a drop there. I call this the real McCoy. It looks like, he's fighting the Hatfields. This is the original scaling pole, and you can see the ladder and a caver there. They just left the ladder for future trips. Anyway, this guy finally is doing the climb. I think the scaling pole made him nervous. He got 50 whole feet of new cave. All right, now I was teaching all this time, and this is the quarry where we teach. I want you to notice those barrels. We came back in the winter, see the barrels? And I said, they wanted to belay me, and I said, I had enough of that in the Oregon Cave, so I wanted to use a reel like I do in a cave. My hands were so cold I couldn't work the reel. So I came back the next year, did a different shape hole, and they belayed us from the surface. It worked a lot better, because it's cold down there. I am standing on the ice. You see the bubbles going towards my feet? But it's great fun playing under the ice, but it's something you do once or twice to say you've done it, and you don't ever do it again. Okay, then I moved back to Atlanta, and I got a telephone call from another Australian who was referred by the first Australian. His name is Ken Smith, and I dug out this picture just to introduce him, but I also noticed that he's got my final version of the Wilson reel, and he has the very first ever back-mounted buoyancy compensator. A year later, they came out with the one they currently use now called Wings, but it won out because you could move it from one tank to the other. Mine you kind of had to have attached to the tanks. Okay, Dave talked about the arrow earlier. We had a workshop. It's kind of like the workshops we have here. In fact, the original cave diving section workshops were at the conventions. And he said that we've been using duct tape folded over to be an arrow. He said, but it's not working real well. And as you know, it's very useful to know which way's out of a cave. Much worse in the water because you don't have that much time to figure it out. After the little discussion we had, some kid came up and drew this on the board, and I said, it kind of looks like a good idea, but it's going to fall off the line. And he went away with his tail between his legs and sounded real sad, but I fiddled around with a whole bunch of different designs and finally came up with this one here in the middle. And this today has been copied worldwide. I wish I'd gotten a patent on it. If I'd gotten a penny an arrow, I would be a rich man. But anyway, that's the current arrow that I'm so famous for. Oh, up at the very top are some of the duct tape arrows. And one of the problems with them is if you were going against them, with holding your hand on the line, you'd fold them up and not even know you'd passed them. Okay. Sheck Exley had met Bill Terode. Bill Terode's currently the librarian for the NSS. Bill gave Sheck a list of diveable or potential leads in Alabama. And he had done one or two, and I found out that, what's his name? Yeah, it'll come to me in a second. But there was a guy from Huntsville that, Joe Dabbs, had a copy of this same list that he'd gotten from Bill, because Sheck wasn't coming up very often. Anyway, we started checking near Huntsville because that's where Joe lived. Of course, I didn't. I had to drive over from Atlanta, so we kind of compromised and we're working up in this area at first. The first one I worked on was Champion Springs. Now, this was just taken in April during a flood. You couldn't get in like that. And actually, this is the way you go in. And it's technically a sump because you have to go 50 feet underground before you get to the water. And this is another guy diving the sump, and this was a little sketch we made, but we never got back to finish this because Joe called me away to Dry Creek. Now, at that time, Dry Creek had gravel all the way up this slope where those tanks are. And they were in the middle of a 20-year drought. So if you came down there and pushed the gravel out of your way a little bit, you could get into a little bit of a dry cave, and then you came to a sump. And Joe had been trying to push this sump, but Joe wasn't a cave diver. He was an open water instructor. About as well qualified as I was on my first sump dive. But anyway, they'd only managed to lay 500 feet of line and had sort of given up. That's why he invited me. And I went in there on one dive, ran out one of my reels, which was 1,000 feet of line, and connected to air. Then I got trapped back in Florida to do we had the International Cave Congress in 81, I think it was. And we did a post-conference camp for anybody that wanted to dive. And we took them down to Florida and we carted them around. And it was all over with. I said, anybody that wants to stay in the U.S. a little while, I'll let you dive some Virgin Cave in Alabama. Well, they jumped on that. And this is beyond the sump. 2 miles this time. I'm still holding the world record at this point. These are some of the formations back there. This young girl was one of the Germans that was there. And a French-Canadian team went in and surveyed the thing for us using topo field. Has anybody in here heard of topo field? One? It looks like a spool out of a sewing machine, the little bobbin thing. And it's got something about the size of thread on it. And they run it through a counter. And they walk along the passage. And when they get to a turn in the passage, they cut the line and leave it in the cave. And take a bearing. And that's the way they surveyed. So it's not super accurate. Well, Joe wanted me to go back in there and resurvey it. Well, the water was up a little bit. And I knew that was going to happen when we first laid the line. So I laid a bunch of extra line. And I was in there trying to follow this line. And got about half a mile in, look at my pressure gauge and say, well, it's time to turn around. And there's no sign that it's going to come up in air. So I start to turn and I feel something tugging at my waist. And I said, oh, good, I've snagged myself in the line. It's definitely time to turn around. So I've got one hand on the line going into the cave. And I reach behind me and find the line behind me. And so I let the line go, going into the cave, and turn around and I start following the line, and it goes straight down under a rock to a bolt snap. I'll follow it back up, and it's coming off my reel. Okay, now I've let the line go. Now this is Alabama. There's no visibility in Alabama. It's not like Florida. Well, you know, by this time I was the training director. I forgot that little story. I should tell you that real quick. Sheck came to me and said, we need to start training, but the NSS won't allow it. They still don't like the concept of certified cavers. So we had to get special permission. So I went before the bog and I said, this is not the same thing as certifying cavers. This is keeping divers alive. We are losing up to 30 divers a year in Florida because they're not trained. So they said, fine, go ahead. Anyway, several of us instructors had gotten together and say, what would you do if you lost the line and the visibility wasn't good enough to see it? So he had come up with this technique, but at that time, nobody had field tested it. I figured this would be a good time. So I found a nice rock. I had a reel in my hand. I tied off on the rock. I had just surveyed it, so I knew it was running north-south. So I went east-west, crossed the floor, went to the wall, went up to the wall, to the ceiling, came back across the ceiling, came back down, found the rock. Now, in low visibility, that's pretty bad odds, but I did find it. So the theory is you crank the line in and you should capture the cave line. It didn't work. I said, this has to work. Exley said it would work. All of the instructors said it would work. And of course, by now your heart rate's... So I said, okay, number one, calm down. Number two, think. Why? Why didn't it work? Because I was lifting the line off the floor. I went right over it. So now I go back again with my hand about 6 inches deep in the silt, stirring it up, making a mess, thinking, if you don't find it this time. Anyway, I made it all the way back, hit that rock the second time. I think the odds must be astronomical. Anyway, now I can't see. Can't read the compass. But I do have the line in my hand. I figured, well, the silt cloud can't go on forever. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Come out of the silt cloud, look at the compass. I'm going the right way. And then my head starts messing with me. Are you sure? You've screwed up enough times on this dive. Are you sure you're going the right way? And then I come across one of these newfangled, recently invented little plastic triangle things. So I'm the first one that I know of that got saved by an arrow. Okay, then we started going off the list. Joe and I. This is Hughes Spring. This is the entrance to it. It's technically a sump, but Sheck had already been in it, but he left a question mark on his map. So we went back to check the question mark, and I don't think anything but an eel could get through there, so we marked that one off. It's done. This is War Eagle. Now, I didn't have a picture of the resurgence, so I used this one. This is a terrible scan of the original slide, but I won a merit award at the salon with this. Anyway, we were diving the resurgence, and I had my students in there. I was letting them all try, and each one of them got another 100 feet. And finally, I was about ready to go in and make the connection, and this Volkswagen van pulls up, the same one that you saw in that picture earlier. And I said, how did Sheck know I was here? Well, it wasn't Sheck, it was Mary Ellen Eckhoff, Sheck's girlfriend. Well, I figure, girl's not going to scoop me. So I let her go. Besides, she was wearing back-mounted doubles, so we were wearing side mount. And she comes back with an empty reel, said, I got into air. So I went to check and followed her ruts in the floor and scrape marks on the ceiling. And sure enough, she'd come up in War Eagle, so she got that one out from under me. But one thing I've learned over the years, if you take all the glory, nobody will help you carry tanks. All right, this is Robinson Spring. This is another one that we checked out. It connects into, I think it's called Blue River. It's in Alabama. This was an interesting one. What I'm doing for time. I better rush here. Well, I want a video here in a minute. Anyway, a guy calls me up at work and said he wanted to buy a reel. And I said, well, are you a certified cave diver? Oh, no, never mind, goodbye. Wait. Because I know that if you don't sell them a reel, they're going to go without one, and they have a much better chance with one. So anyway, I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. You show me this cave you want to dive in, and if it goes, I will give you a reel. Well, we got up there, and as you can see, it's not the greatest looking place in the world. We got in there, I think maybe 150 feet. He called the dive. It wasn't much beyond that. The water got clear. And it's a very nice cave. It's not very long, only 500 feet. This is Craig's Mill, in case you, Louis, you're wondering. Then I spent 16 years building this stupid airplane because my ex wanted to be a pilot. And then she left me, so I've sold the plane, so... Anyway, first thing I did when I came back was discover an online cave diver forum. And I met this guy online. And the reason I met him was he was looking for a cave diver because he had a cave he wanted somebody to dive. So I got a team. This isn't the first trip. I couldn't find a good picture of that. But this guy, well, actually everybody in the picture was on the first trip. But we split up and went two different directions. There's an upstream and a downstream. And I was on the downstream team with another diver from Florida named Cindy Butler. She was a real hard-pushing explorer for a long time, but she's quit now. We get down to the sump, and we're almost to the sump. We're carrying 4 tanks, got the whole, Central Basin Grotto, the one that Murfreesboro used to have. But anyway, one of our helpers dropped a tank, and we never did find it. I think it's still there. So we sort of drew straws, and I let Cindy go first, and she broke through the sump. And I came back the next trip, and I went there. And the problem with the downstream sump, same thing was in Oregon Cave, is when you're walking to the water, you stir up all the silt. And normally in Florida, you'd be able to see all the way down to my feet. In fact, you can see 70 or 80 feet. But I went through. Marby says, "Here, take my survey kit." I said, "No, I've got a survey kit. Don't worry about it." I got the other side of that sump, pulled out my survey kit, and it was missing a tape. Had a compass, everything fine, no tape. So we paced it, and we came up with 1,500 feet, and we hit another sump. Now, there's at least one person in here that knows where this goes, but it's headed towards Rumbling Falls, a famous vertical cave there in Tennessee. So, unfortunately, it's going to be hard to connect those two together. And Jason Richards has tried from the other end and wasn't very successful, so it may never happen. And then, as Dave mentioned, I built a rebreather. Actually, this is my 4th one. You know, it's kind of like the reels. I think I did 4 reels before I came up with one that worked. But I had this at a workshop in Missouri, and a guy came up and looked at it and got real interested. And the next thing I know, he's got a prototype he wants me to test. And then he ended up going to work for a rebreather manufacturer, and now he owns the rebreather manufacturer. So I bought one of his copies of my rebreather. He's a better machinist than I am. All right, this is snail shell. I'm going to whiz through snail shell because we're running out of time. I'll go back one. That thing he's got in his hand is we call a silt stake. If you're in an area with a bottom with no rocks to tie off on, you stick these things in the mud to hold the line. Anyway, that's a selfie from the far side, and that's where he got that picture with the beer can at the beginning. There's a kiosk there. This is a SCCI, Southeastern Cave Conservancy cave. It says, "Don't go in this cave when it's raining." We did. I was against it, but they all wanted to go. And you know, I'm Papa Bear. I figured I better go help them. We get to the sump, and we can't find the little island that we gear up on. And it had all the lead that we use. I finally wandered around and found the top of a cairn of lead that was like about 1 foot high, 3 inches under the water. So they were able to dive. I went back upstream a little bit, downstream actually a little bit, and found another sandbar to lie on, and I'm waiting for him to come out, and finally hear him. And I wake up, and where's my sandbar? I'm lying in the water. And then I realize I can hear the waterfall that's 1,000 feet away. Not good. Well, we head on out. We get to the waterfall. They all jump in the water ahead of me. I get up there and I said, "I don't think I can jump from this angle. I'm just going to sit down." No, that's dangerous. Jump. You can't do a standing broad jump if your feet are as far apart as they'll go. But I tried, went over, twisted my knee, tumbled in the plunge pool for a few seconds, popped up. They said, "Okay, he's fine, let's go." I wasn't, but I didn't need to walk. I just was being pushed out. Anyway, here's a picture. All right, now I'm going to go through some real quick ones. Mark asked me to help him survey. I said, why? He wanted to locate a well. I said, that's the hard way. Ken Smith had made this cave locator, so we located it with that. Found another one that wasn't on Theroux list. This one it's already got a half a mile of line in it, but it's still going. This one, Don Harder talked me into going to. It was on Theroux list, but we spent a bunch of time. This is the second longest in Alabama now. Then I ended up 1 year. I went to Mexico, the Bahamas. This is the Bahamas. Ken took the pinger with him, so I didn't have one anymore. Then I got invited to Dominican Republic. We pushed some stuff there, but it didn't go. He said, you can go to the end of the line here and add line if you want. Well, we got within 50 feet, and my buddy turned us, so I didn't get to line. Finally got to go to Australia, and that's in a cave in Australia. And I went to France, England, and Wales on one trip, and this is the picture that's in the NSS News. And this is the first cave ever that they did a cave dive in. And this is Florence. This is the longest one. You see the little blue thing right there? That's where we did I built my own locator after that. And that's where we located that cave. And you can see those other things are survey stations from the map. And we're not very far off. So an underwater survey is not that bad. It's not a class 5, but it's not bad. We're still working on this one. The last one right here was the 4th of July. And we've got to go back because the landowner was not happy with where that was. He says, that's my 60-acre field. I have 5,000 acres on the other side of the road. Please find me a well over there. Oh, gee, twist my arm. This is the Walls map. Now, I'm going to end it with this, except for the video, which we're going to have to cut short. Somebody asked me once what my favorite cave was, and it occurred to me that my favorite cave is one with no line in it, and this is my most recent lead, and that's what I'm going to do as soon as I get home. All right, you can cut this and do the video. The reason I'm doing the video is you've probably seen underwater pictures in Mexico or Florida where the water's clear, but I'm going to show you what a pretty good tag cave looks like. It's not the average one. It's better than average. All right, just the landowner owns this boat. He's not poor. All right, this is one of my buddies. I've learned to have a team now and don't try to solo. This is in the lake. This thing's right on the edge of the lake. And as you see, as we get in there, get into the trash, the water clears up because the cave water coming out is reasonably clear. And in a second here, you watch my light. That little circle means I'm okay, and I expect him to answer with he's okay before we go in. Now, we had one interesting little problem, which you'll see in a few seconds. I should have just clipped the beginning of this and gotten into the cave, but all right, you see that? That's a grass carp. And in a second, you'll see that the turkeys stir up the mud on purpose to hide, which is not real good for cave divers because you can't see. You'll see, there he is. But this is exceptional visibility for tag. I mean, we had about 30 feet of visibility, and normally 5 is a good day. But how much longer can we go? 5 minutes. We'll let it run 5 more minutes. And I think in a second or two, you'll see how we use those silt stakes. I think I laid, about 1,000 feet, one full reel on the first dive. And that pinger's located about, the cave locator is about 2,000 feet, and we're at 3,100 right now. but we still... Oh, this was an interesting thing while we were watching this. I was talking to the landowner, and his father came by, and he said that his grandfather had been in this cave. And I'm thinking, how is this possible? They didn't even have scuba back then. This is on the Tennessee River, in a lake on the Tennessee River, which wasn't there when his grandfather went in the cave. So this is not really a virgin cave. There's the silt stake. And also found out that one of his ancestors is buried in this cave. I'm just waiting for the bones to come floating up. And I found a newspaper article about this cave. Local lore says that they've gone in, when it was dry, a mile. Now, of course, they didn't survey it, so that you can take that with a grain of salt. But at 3,100 feet, it's big and going. I'll tell you what, we'll cut this off because it's just more of the same. I mean, you've seen one cave passage, you've seen them all, right? So, somebody want to turn the lights on? Well, since it's traditional, does anybody have any questions? Oh, who's the lady? I told you I wasn't going to answer that question. She's she was secretary of the NSS for 25 years. I've mentioned her husband's name.
How many caves or states have you dived in, Forrest?
Thank you.
Can you repeat the question?
How many states have I dived in? Yesterday, I would have said 11. Today, it's 12.
How many different dives do you think you've been?
Oh God, we have. All right, how many different dives have I done? We have awards for different levels of diving. When they first came up with this concept for 100 safe cave dives, I had already done the 100 long ago. Then I stopped to build this plane, and I came back, and somebody said, we now have a 500 dive award. Do you think you have that many? I said, yeah, I had that many before I stopped diving. Well, now I've been another 10 years, and I get in easily 100 dives a year, so that's another 1,000 on top of that. I got my 1,000th dive in 2004, and I've done probably another 1,000 since then, so I would guess on the order of 2,000. Anybody? All right, we'll give the room to the next group.